The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan valley as combat medic Sarah Chun checked her gear one final time. At 26 years old, she had already completed 3 tours of duty, but something felt different about this mission. The intelligence report spoke of a high-value target hiding in a remote compound, and her unit was tasked with providing medical support for what should have been a routine extraction operation. Sarah adjusted her medical pack, feeling the familiar weight of supplies that had saved countless lives over the past 4 years. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she inventoried her equipment: tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, morphine, and dozens of other items that could mean the difference between life and death in combat. She had earned the respect of every soldier in her unit, not just for her medical skills, but for her unwavering calm under fire. The convoy of armored vehicles rumbled through the dusty terrain toward the target location. Sarah sat quietly, reviewing the mission briefing in her mind. Intelligence suggested minimal resistance, but her experience had taught her that no mission ever went exactly according to plan. She thought about her younger brother back home in California, who had just started college. He always said she was the bravest person he knew, but Sarah never felt brave. She simply did what needed to be done. As they approached the compound, the radio crackled with updates from the reconnaissance team. The target building sat on a hillside overlooking a narrow valley, with clear sight lines in all directions. It was a defensible position, but intelligence insisted that only a handful of militants remained inside. The plan was simple: secure the perimeter, extract the target, and return to base before nightfall. Sarah's vehicle came to a stop behind a rocky outcropping that provided cover from the compound. She could see the ancient stone building through her binoculars, its weathered walls telling stories of countless conflicts that had swept through this region over the centuries. Smoke drifted from a chimney, suggesting recent occupation. Everything appeared normal, almost too normal. The team leader, Sergeant Martinez, gathered the squad for a final briefing. Sarah listened intently as he outlined the approach route and assigned positions. Her job was to establish a casualty collection point behind a main assault team and provide immediate medical care for any wounded. It was a role she had performed dozens of times, but the responsibility never felt routine. As the team began their approach, Sarah noticed movement in the windows of a neighboring building. She reported it through her radio, but the response came back that surveillance had already cleared that structure. Still, something nagged at her instincts. In 4 years of combat, she had learned to trust those feelings, even when logic suggested otherwise. The assault team reached the compound entrance without incident. Sarah watched from her position as they prepared to breach the door. Through her scope, she could see the professional precision with which they worked. These were experienced soldiers who had conducted hundreds of similar operations. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Then, the world exploded into chaos. The first shot came from a rooftop 300 meters away, dropping the point man instantly. Within seconds, automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions around the valley. Sarah's heart raced as she realized they had walked directly into a carefully planned ambush. The intelligence had been completely wrong, or worse, compromised. Sarah immediately began moving toward the wounded soldier, her medical training overriding any concern for her own safety. Bullets whined overhead as she low-crawled across the rocky ground, her medical pack feeling heavier with each passing second. She could hear Sergeant Martinez shouting orders over the radio, trying to coordinate a response to an attack that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. The wounded soldier was losing blood rapidly from a gunshot wound to his upper thigh. Sarah worked quickly to apply pressure and control the bleeding while bullets continued to impact the rocks around them. Her hands remained steady despite the chaos, years of training taking over when conscious thought became impossible. She managed to get a tourniquet in place and dragged the soldier to better cover behind a large boulder. More casualties began mounting as the hidden shooters found their range. Sarah realized that the enemy had spent considerable time preparing this ambush, positioning themselves in concealed locations throughout the valley. Every piece of cover that should have protected her team was being targeted with deadly precision. They were outgunned and surrounded with no clear escape route. Radio calls for air support went unanswered. The nearest helicopter was 40 minutes away, and the team was taking heavy casualties with each passing minute. Sarah treated wound after wound, moving between injured soldiers while staying as low as possible. She had never been in a firefight this intense, where the enemy seemed to anticipate every move. As she worked on the third casualty, a bullet struck the rock inches from her head, sending stone fragments into her cheek. The sharp pain reminded her that she was just as vulnerable as everyone else, despite her focus on helping others. Blood trickled down her face as she continued working, but she barely noticed. The enemy fire intensified, and Sarah realized they were being systematically pinned down. Every time someone tried to move to a better position, sniper fire would force them back into cover. It was becoming clear that this was not a random ambush, but a carefully orchestrated trap designed to eliminate the entire unit. Someone had known exactly where they would be and when they would arrive. Sergeant Martinez crawled over to Sarah's position, his face grim. He explained that they had lost radio contact with base and that several team members were seriously wounded. The enemy appeared to have them completely surrounded, and ammunition was running low. They needed to find a way out of the valley before dark, or they would all be killed. Sarah looked around at the wounded soldiers depending on her care and felt a familiar determination settle over her. She had never lost a patient in combat, and she was not going to start now. Somehow, they would find a way to survive this ambush and get everyone home safely. But as more enemy fire rained down on their position, that outcome seemed increasingly unlikely. The sound of her heart beating mixed with the crack of rifle fire as Sarah continued her work. She had no way of knowing that high above on a distant ridge, a lone figure was adjusting the scope on a sniper rifle, preparing to change the course of the battle. For now, all she could do was keep her wounded teammates alive and hope that help would arrive before their ammunition ran out completely. 3 miles away on a windswept ridge, Navy SEAL sniper Jake Morrison lay motionless behind his rifle, watching the chaos unfold through his high-powered scope. He had been conducting a separate reconnaissance mission when the radio chatter reached him about a unit in distress. The coordinates placed a firefight directly in his area of operations, and he could see muzzle flashes erupting throughout the valley below. Morrison had been a SEAL sniper for 8 years, with over 40 confirmed kills across multiple deployments. His reputation for long-range accuracy was legendary within the special operations community. But what set him apart was not just his shooting ability, but his tactical awareness and ability to read a battlefield from miles away. Through his scope, he could see that the unit below was trapped in a carefully planned kill zone. The enemy positions were expertly concealed, using natural terrain and prepared fighting positions to create overlapping fields of fire. Morrison counted at least 12 different shooting positions, all focused on a small area where the American soldiers were pinned down. It was a professional ambush, the kind that took weeks to plan and execute. Someone had leaked information about this mission. Through his scope, Morrison watched a female medic moving between wounded soldiers with complete disregard for her own safety. Even from his distant position, he could see her calm efficiency as she treated casualties under intense fire. Her courage reminded him of his own sister, who served as an army nurse. The sight of someone so vulnerable yet determined strengthened his resolve to act. Morrison quickly calculated the range to the nearest enemy positions. At over 800 meters, most of the shots would be at the extreme edge of effective range for his rifle system. Wind conditions were favorable, but the angle down into the valley would complicate his calculations. He would need to account for both gravity drop and the atmospheric pressure differences at various elevations. The first target Morrison selected was an enemy sniper positioned on a rooftop 400 meters from the trapped soldiers. This shooter had the best angle on the American position and was causing the most casualties. Morrison adjusted his scope, controlled his breathing, and squeezed the trigger with practiced smoothness. The enemy sniper dropped from view, his rifle clattering to the ground below. The second shot came 30 seconds later, targeting a machine gun position that was raking the American cover with devastating fire. Morrison's bullet found its mark, silencing the automatic weapon and giving the trapped soldiers their first moment of relative quiet since the ambush began. He could see movement below as the medic took advantage of the brief respite to reach another wounded soldier. But Morrison's intervention had not gone unnoticed. Enemy fighters began scanning the ridgelines, searching for the source of the precise rifle fire that had eliminated two of their key positions. Morrison knew he had perhaps 2 or 3 more shots before they would locate his position and begin returning fire. He needed to make each bullet count. Down in the valley, Sarah Chun heard the distant crack of a high-powered rifle followed by the sudden silence of the machine gun that had been keeping them pinned down. She looked up from the soldier she was treating, confused by the unexpected change in the battle's tempo. Sergeant Martinez was equally puzzled, but he was not about to waste the opportunity. The radio crackled with Martinez's voice as he coordinated a tactical movement to better cover. Several soldiers began moving to new positions, taking advantage of the suppressed enemy fire. Sarah remained focused on her patients, but she could sense that something had shifted in their favor. The overwhelming enemy fire had become sporadic and less accurate. Morrison continued his deadly work from the ridge, methodically eliminating enemy positions with surgical precision. His fourth shot took out a spotter who was directing mortar fire onto the American position. The fifth silenced an enemy sniper who had been attempting to target the medic specifically. Each shot required careful calculation and perfect execution, as the slightest error would result in a miss at these extreme ranges. The enemy fighters in the valley began to panic as their carefully planned ambush fell apart under the precise fire from an invisible enemy. Several positions abandoned their prepared fighting spots and attempted to withdraw to more secure locations. This movement gave Morrison additional targets as the enemy exposed themselves while trying to escape his deadly accurate fire. Sarah noticed that the enemy fire was becoming increasingly disorganized. Where before it had been coordinated and disciplined, now it seemed random and desperate. She did not understand what had changed, but she was grateful for any advantage that might help them survive this impossible situation. She continued moving between wounded soldiers, applying field dressings, and keeping them stable. Morrison's ammunition was running low, and he knew that enemy reinforcements would likely arrive soon. He had perhaps 6 or 7 rounds remaining, and he needed to use them to create an opportunity for the trapped soldiers to escape the kill zone. He selected targets that would open specific escape routes while maintaining suppressive fire on the most dangerous enemy positions. The battlefield dynamics were shifting rapidly. Enemy fighters who had felt secure in their prepared positions now faced the constant threat of death from an unseen sniper. Their discipline broke down as individual fighters began making decisions based on self-preservation rather than tactical objectives. The carefully orchestrated ambush was becoming a disorganized retreat. Sergeant Martinez recognized the opportunity and began planning an immediate extraction. The wounded would need to be carried, which would slow their movement considerably, but staying in their current position was no longer viable. The mysterious sniper support had given them a chance, but it would not last forever. They needed to move while the enemy was still disorganized. Sarah received orders to prepare her patients for immediate evacuation. She worked quickly to stabilize the most seriously wounded soldiers for transport, knowing that the rough movement might worsen their injuries. But staying meant certain death for all of them, so the risk was acceptable. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she secured bandages and checked tourniquets. Morrison watched the American soldiers begin their movement through his scope. The medic was helping carry one of the most severely wounded, her small frame struggling with the weight, but never hesitating. He shifted his fire to provide cover for their withdrawal route, engaging any enemy position that attempted to target the moving soldiers. The evacuation was proceeding successfully when Morrison spotted new movement on the far side of the valley. A fresh group of enemy fighters was arriving, armed with rocket-propelled grenades and automatic weapons. They were moving to intercept the American withdrawal route, and their arrival would trap the soldiers in another kill zone just as deadly as the first. Morrison had 3 rounds remaining in his magazine, and no time to reload. The new enemy force was already in position and preparing to open fire on the evacuating Americans. Through his scope, he could see the medics still helping carry wounded soldiers, completely unaware of the new threat developing behind her. In seconds, they would all be caught in another devastating ambush. The weight of the moment settled on Morrison's shoulders as he realized that his next 3 shots would likely determine whether the American soldiers lived or died. He had been in similar situations before, but never with stakes quite this clear. The lives of an entire unit depended on his ability to place 3 perfect shots under extreme pressure at maximum range. Morrison steadied his rifle and began selecting targets among the new enemy force. Time seemed to slow as he prepared to take the most important shots of his career. In the valley below, the medic continued her work, unaware that her survival hung in the balance of sniper skill on a distant ridge. Morrison's first shot from his final 3 rounds struck the enemy grenade launcher just as the fighter was preparing to fire at the evacuating Americans. The explosion from the detonating RPG round eliminated 2 additional enemy soldiers and scattered the rest of the newly arrived force. The blast echoed across the valley, momentarily stunning both sides of the conflict. The second shot took out an enemy fighter who was attempting to set up a machine gun in a position that would have commanded the entire evacuation route. Morrison's bullet arrived just as the weapon was being loaded, preventing what would have been a massacre of the exposed American soldiers. The precision of the long-range shot sent the remaining enemy fighters scrambling for better cover. With 1 round remaining, Morrison faced an impossible choice. 3 separate enemy positions still posed significant threats to the evacuating soldiers, but he could only eliminate one of them. Through his scope, he watched the medics struggling to help carry a wounded soldier while enemy fighters adjusted their positions to target the slow-moving group. Morrison selected the enemy position with the clearest shot at the medic. His final round traveled nearly 900 meters before finding its target, eliminating the sniper who had been lining up for a shot at Sarah Chun. The rifle bolt locked back on an empty magazine, and Morrison's immediate contribution to the battle was finished. In the valley below, Sarah heard the explosions and rifle fire, but remained focused on her immediate task of keeping the wounded soldiers alive during the chaotic evacuation. She had no idea that someone on a distant ridge had been methodically eliminating threats specifically to protect her and her patients. Her world consisted only of the next step, the next patient, and the desperate hope that they would all reach safety. The enemy force was now thoroughly disorganized, with their leadership eliminated and their carefully prepared positions compromised. Small groups of fighters began withdrawing from the valley entirely, abandoning the ambush that had taken weeks to plan and prepare. The mysterious sniper had single-handedly destroyed their tactical advantage and broken their will to continue the fight. Sergeant Martinez was amazed by the sudden turn in their fortune. The overwhelming enemy fire that had threatened to annihilate his entire unit had been reduced to sporadic, ineffective harassment. He did not understand how this had happened, but he was determined to take advantage of the opportunity. His soldiers moved quickly toward the extraction point, carrying their wounded comrades with renewed hope. Morrison began his own withdrawal from the ridge position. His mission was complete, but he needed to reach the extraction point before enemy reinforcements arrived in the area. He packed his gear quickly and began the difficult descent from his elevated position. The rocky terrain required careful navigation, especially while carrying his heavy sniper rifle and equipment. As Morrison moved through the mountainous terrain, he monitored the radio traffic describing the successful evacuation of the trapped unit. All soldiers had reached the landing zone safely, including several who had been critically wounded in the initial ambush. The medic had performed exceptionally under fire, saving lives that would otherwise have been lost. Sarah finally allowed herself to feel relief as the helicopters approached the landing zone. All of her patients were stable and would receive definitive medical care within hours. She had never experienced such an intense firefight, and she was still trying to process everything that had happened. The sudden change in the battle's momentum remained a mystery to her. The helicopter ride back to base gave Sarah time to reflect on the events of the day. She thought about the wounded soldier she had treated and the moment when the enemy fire had suddenly become less accurate and coordinated. Something had happened during that firefight that she did not understand, but she was grateful for whatever force had intervened on their behalf. Morrison reached his own extraction point several hours later, where a helicopter was waiting to return him to his base. He said nothing about his intervention in the Valley firefight, as his presence in that area was part of a classified mission. The successful evacuation of the trapped unit would be attributed to their own tactical skills and courage under fire. Back at base, Sarah worked alongside the surgical team to ensure that all of her patients received appropriate care. Every soldier she had treated in the field survived their injuries, a testament to her skill and dedication under the most challenging circumstances. She felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that her training and courage had made the difference between life and death for her fellow soldiers. The after-action report of the ambush described an enemy force that had inexplicably withdrawn from superior positions without achieving their tactical objectives. Intelligence analysts struggled to explain why a carefully planned ambush had fallen apart so quickly. The report noted the exceptional performance of the unit's medic under fire, but made no mention of outside intervention. Morrison filed his own mission report, which described a successful reconnaissance operation in the mountain region. He made no reference to his engagement with enemy forces during the Valley ambush, as such disclosure would have compromised operational security. His actions remained classified, known only to a few individuals in the special operations community. Weeks later, Sarah received a commendation for her heroic actions during the ambush. The citation praised her courage under fire and her successful treatment of multiple casualties in an extremely dangerous environment. She accepted the recognition with characteristic humility, insisting that she had simply done her job as a combat medic. Morrison read about the commendation in the base newsletter and felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that his actions had contributed to the medic's success. He never sought recognition for his intervention, finding fulfillment in the knowledge that his skills had saved the lives of fellow Americans. The mission had reminded him why he had become a SEAL sniper in the first place. The valley where the ambush had taken place was later secured by coalition forces, who discovered the elaborate network of prepared fighting positions that had been constructed over several weeks. Intelligence analysis confirmed that the ambush had been planned specifically to target American forces, using inside information about patrol routes and timing. The enemy had invested significant resources in the operation, only to see it fail completely. Sarah continued her service as a combat medic, carrying with her the confidence gained from surviving the most challenging situation of her career. She never learned about the sniper who had provided cover for her evacuation, but she often wondered about the sudden change in the enemy fire that had allowed them to escape. The mystery added to her appreciation for the unpredictable nature of combat and the importance of never giving up hope. Morrison completed several more successful missions before rotating back to the United States for specialized training. His reputation as an exceptional sniper continued to grow, but those who knew him best understood that his greatest strength was not his marksmanship, but his commitment to protecting his fellow service members. The Valley engagement had been one of many times he had used his skills to save American lives. The bond forged between the unknown sniper and the combat medic would never be acknowledged officially, but it represented the best of military service. Individuals risking everything to protect their comrades, regardless of personal recognition or reward. Their story became one of countless examples of heroism that occurred daily in combat zones around the world, most of which are never recorded or celebrated publicly. 6 months after the Valley ambush, Sarah Chun found herself at a military medical conference in Germany, presenting her research on combat trauma treatment. Her experience in Afghanistan had led to improved protocols for treating battlefield injuries, and her work was gaining recognition throughout the military medical community. She had been promoted to staff sergeant and was considered one of the most experienced combat medics in her unit. The conference brought together medical personnel from various branches of the military, along with special operations forces who provided insights into the realities of modern combat. Sarah was scheduled to present her findings on emergency field surgery techniques that had proven effective in high-stress environments. Her presentation drew heavily from her experiences during the ambush that had nearly cost her entire unit their lives. During a break between presentations, Sarah noticed a tall, quiet man in navy dress uniform examining the display boards that showed her research data. He seemed particularly interested in her timeline of the Valley engagement and the medical interventions that had saved multiple lives under fire. There was something familiar about his bearing, though she could not place where she might have seen him before. The man approached her display and introduced himself as Petty Officer Morrison, a Navy SEAL medic who was attending the conference to learn about the latest trauma treatment techniques. He asked detailed questions about her procedures during the ambush, particularly regarding how she had managed to maintain focus while under heavy enemy fire. His questions demonstrated a deep understanding of combat medicine and battlefield dynamics. Sarah found Morrison's insights fascinating, as he seemed to have an unusual perspective on the tactical situation she had faced. He asked about specific details of the enemy fire patterns and how they had changed during the course of the engagement. His questions were more tactical than medical, suggesting experience beyond that of a typical SEAL medic. As their conversation continued, Morrison mentioned that he had been operating in the same general area during the time of her unit's ambush. He spoke knowledgeably about the terrain and the enemy tactics that were common in that region. Sarah began to suspect that Morrison might have been involved in the mysterious events that had turned the tide of their desperate battle. Morrison was careful not to reveal classified information, but he expressed genuine admiration for Sarah's courage under fire. He mentioned that reports of her actions had circulated within the special operations community, where her dedication to her wounded comrades had become something of a legend. Sarah was surprised to learn that her actions were known outside her immediate unit. During the evening reception, Sarah and Morrison continued their conversation over dinner. They discovered they had both grown up in California and shared similar motivations for military service. Morrison spoke about his sister who served as an Army nurse, and Sarah mentioned her brother who was studying to become a doctor. The personal connection helped them move beyond their professional roles. Morrison carefully guided the conversation toward the Valley engagement, asking Sarah about her recollections of how the enemy fire had suddenly become less effective. He was particularly interested in her perspective on the timing of the changes in the battle's momentum. Sarah admitted that she had never understood why the enemy had seemed to lose their tactical advantage so suddenly. As the evening progressed, Morrison found himself wanting to tell Sarah about his role in her survival, but operational security prevented him from revealing classified details. Instead, he spoke generally about how special operations forces often provided support to conventional units without their knowledge. He suggested that her unit might have benefited from such assistance during their crisis. Sarah began to piece together the implications of Morrison's careful comments. The timing of his presence in the area, his detailed knowledge of the engagement, and his obvious expertise with long-range weapons suggested a connection to the mysterious intervention that had saved her unit. She decided to test her suspicions with a direct question about sniper operations in the region. Morrison's reaction confirmed Sarah's growing certainty that he had been involved in the events that saved her life. Though he could not admit his role directly, his expression and careful choice of words made it clear that he knew far more about the Valley engagement than he could officially acknowledge. The realization left Sarah with mixed emotions of gratitude and curiosity. The next morning, Sarah approached Morrison before the final conference session. She thanked him for his service and mentioned that she hoped to serve alongside dedicated professionals like him in future operations. Her words carried an additional meaning that both understood, acknowledging a debt that could never be officially recognized or repaid. Morrison accepted her thanks with characteristic humility, emphasizing that all service members looked out for each other regardless of branch or unit affiliation. He mentioned that knowing dedicated medics like her were serving made his own dangerous work more meaningful. Their exchange was formal, but carried an emotional weight that transcended their brief acquaintance. After the conference, Sarah and Morrison stayed in touch through professional channels, sharing insights about combat medicine and tactical innovations. Their correspondence was always careful to avoid classified information, but it maintained a connection forged by their shared experience in the Afghan Valley. Neither ever directly acknowledged what had really happened that day. Years later, Sarah would advance to become one of the Army's leading experts on combat trauma treatment, developing training programs that saved countless lives. Her experiences in Afghanistan, particularly the Valley engagement, shaped her understanding of battlefield medicine and the importance of maintaining hope in desperate situations. She often spoke about the unpredictable nature of combat and the importance of never giving up. Morrison continued his career as a SEAL sniper, participating in numerous classified operations around the world. He carried with him the memory of the day when his skills had made the difference between life and death for a unit of American soldiers. The engagement reminded him that his specialized training served a greater purpose than simply eliminating enemy targets. The professional relationship between Sarah and Morrison evolved into a lasting friendship built on mutual respect and shared values. They occasionally attended the same military conferences and training events, always maintaining the careful boundaries required by operational security. Their connection represented the best aspects of military service, professionals dedicated to protecting their comrades. Sarah eventually transitioned to civilian medicine, using her military experience to improve trauma care in civilian hospitals. Her techniques, developed under fire in Afghanistan, proved invaluable in emergency rooms across the country. She often credited her military service with teaching her to remain calm under pressure and never give up on a patient. Morrison retired from active duty after completing over 100 special operations missions, many of which remained classified. He moved into training roles, passing on his expertise to the next generation of special operations forces. The skills and experience he shared with young SEALs included lessons learned during the Valley engagement about the importance of protecting fellow service members. The story of their brief encounter in the Afghan Valley became part of military lore, though the full details remain classified. It represented the countless acts of courage and sacrifice that occurred daily in military service, most of which are never publicly recognized. The bond between the sniper and the medic exemplified the military creed that no one is left behind. In quiet moments, both Sarah and Morrison sometimes reflected on the day when their paths had crossed under fire. They understood that their brief professional acquaintance at the conference had allowed them to acknowledge, however, indirectly, a connection forged in combat. The knowledge that dedicated professionals like each other were serving made their own sacrifices more meaningful and reminded them why they had chosen to serve their country.